Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Today, the entirety of the St. Louis Public Radio listening area will experience at least a partial solar eclipse. That's where the moon passes between the Earth and Sun and blocks sunlight. For areas of southeastern Missouri and southern Illinois, people will experience a total solar eclipse from about 1:59 to 2:04. People in that path of totality will have a chance to see the brilliant white edges of the sun peeking behind the inky black shadow of the moon. In a moment, we'll check in with STLPR reporters about how they're covering the eclipse. But we turn now to the history of these rare celestial events. Manel Errando is an assistant professor of physics at Washington University. He's looked into how humans over thousands of years have kept watch, kept track, and kept trying to understand what solar eclipses mean. When I spoke with Manel Errando earlier this year, I first asked him about the earliest record of a solar eclipse.
So the first recorded solar eclipse that we have knowledge of, it was recorded by Chinese astronomers, and it's dated to year 2137 BC, more than 4,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was recorded in so it was in the time of the Xia dynasty, mm-hmm. and they had a book of records that they called the Xia Shu, which I think it translates to the book of the dynasty of the Xia. And they recorded this event, and in particular they recorded this event because they were keeping track of eclipses to basically keep track of their calendar, mm-hmm. right? Because there is a sort of periodicity to this, to how the moon and the sun and the earth move, so that every about 18 years, the sun, the moon, and the earth are more or less at the same spot. So every 18 years, kind of the whole cycle goes back to where it was, mm-hmm. and that would keep their calendars on track. So these astronomers were trying to predict this eclipse, and they kind of missed it. And that's why this one, it looks like that's the reason why this one went on the record.
Right. So when you say kind of missed it, what were the circumstances surrounding that?
Well, so the story says that these two astronomers of the court, it looks like they were out drinking instead of having been doing their calculations about when the eclipse would happen. And then when the eclipse happened and they had not notified the emperor that this eclipse would happen and they had failed to make the prediction, let's say that the emperor wasn't very happy about it.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I think it is important, too, to talk about what they were expected to do during the eclipse. And it had to do with warding off evil and danger.
Yes, so I think eclipses have been always associated with, usually more often than not, with bad things happening rather than good things happening.
Sure.
And it sort of makes sense to think about, so if we think about the earliest humans that were basically nomads and living off of nature, it made a lot of sense for them to be looking at the sky, because you can get a lot of good information if you're looking at the sky. Mm-hmm. The moon and the sun are our first calendars, and if you are living off of the land, it's of course very important to know when the seasons are changing, when your hunting is going to be better in certain areas, when it's going to get colder, when you need to store food. So they were keeping track of these patterns in the sky, like the sun rising higher in summer and going lower in winter, and trying to make predictions mm-hmm. out of it. And that was very useful for them. But at the same time, there's things that happen in the sky that are not related to the seasons or to our calendar, like, for instance, solar eclipses or comets or sometimes, I don't know, stars go into explosions and there is a nova. So there's a new star that shows up in the sky that you didn't know. And because they were so well trained to finding patterns, then probably they thought, oh, these weird things that are happening that are not as predictable, they may have coincidentally happened when something bad happened to the community, and then those associations stayed in there, and that happened to eclipses. So for in most cultures, lunar eclipses and solar eclipses were usually bad omens and a sign that something bad would happen, and then they would have their rituals to protect themselves for these potentially bad things.
And then the rituals involved doing things to ward off.
Yeah, yes. So there's different interpretations about what the eclipses were. I think so. One of the ones that I found, for example, in Chinese culture, was what there was a dragon that would be eating up the sun, and they would try to protect the sun from this dragon that was eating it, because of course they needed the sun. It's important for living. Yeah.
Right. And so ultimately what happened with those astronomers were that they were...
Yeah, so eventually, again, the emperor wasn't very pleased about them having missed the prediction of the eclipse. So they were executed, it looks like.
Now, there are other examples as well, and one of the most famous ancient solar eclipses was recorded. This was in 585 BCE in Anatolia, or present-day Turkey, during a battle between the Medes people and the Lydians. What is it that we know about that day, Manel?
So we know from later reports from historians, from Herodotus in particular, that apparently the two armies went into battle that day, and towards the end of the day, the record says that the sun disappeared from the sky and the day turned into night, which it's very easy to interpret as a solar eclipse happening. And basically, the two armies were kind of paralyzed by the event, and they decided to work on a peace treaty that actually set the river where this happened as the border between the two nations for a few years.
And the Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus came to some renown after this, right?
Yes, and it was because, again, according to records, he had predicted, he had warned the armies that there would be an eclipse happening in that region at that time. And at least the archaeoastronomers that study these type of events, there is no consensus on whether he could have predicted it or not. But at least there's historical records that says that he did. And of course, if you are able to predict an event that's so rare, that made him
famous. Basically.
Yeah. more famous than what he already was.
Mm-hmm. Now, you did mention that there were many cultures and civilizations in which eclipses were regarded as inauspicious signs. What were a couple of those civilizations, and what details can you sort of share to help us understand how they were dealing with or managing these events?
Yeah. So one of the examples that I like the most is what was happening in Mesopotamian cultures or the Assyrians. So we're talking about between, 2000 BC and 6000 BC, so a while ago. And they were very good astronomers and astrologers, so they were keeping track of everything that was happening in the sky. And they had this, they thought that, again, solar eclipses and lunar eclipses would be a bad omen and something bad would happen. And in particular, they thought that something bad would happen to the king. Mm-hmm. So a total solar eclipse is pretty rare, right? But partial solar eclipses are not that rare. They happen more often because they cross a wider swath of the Earth. Mm-hmm. And so for partial solar eclipses, depending on what part of the sun was being kind of bitten by the moon in this case, mm-hmm. They had divided their kingdom in 4 regions, and depending on what part was being obscured, they would think that king was the one that was in danger. But they had a set of rules. Like, for example, they said, if the if there's a solar eclipse, but Venus and Jupiter are in the sky, then the king is safe. But probably the enemy will attack us. Okay. So they had a series of rules. And whenever there was a solar eclipse where Venus and Jupiter were not in the sky, and then that meant that the king was not safe. Mm-hmm. One thing that some kings thought was, well, then maybe now that this eclipse happened and something bad's going to happen to me, I'll step down, and they would put someone from the court as the king for a while. And then, again, to protect the whole community from the bad omen that the eclipse was signaling, they would sacrifice the king, which was the substitute king, right?
Right.
So that is it's recorded. There's several records of that happening, and there's one record of a king that was the king of the Assyrians around year 1800 BC, where the king stepped down, they put a substitute king, but then apparently the king died during those days, according to the records, because he was eating soup that was too hot. I'm not sure what's the danger. I always tend to eat my soup colder, just to make sure that I'm not on the safe side. But the actual king died, and then the person that had just stepped up, who was probably the gardener of the court, he continued to rule, and he was the king until he died, hopefully of natural causes.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Professor Manel Errando, who is an assistant professor of physics at Washington University, and we're talking about our understanding of solar eclipses over time in human history, how it's affected culture, and how we do things. So, understanding over time, I mean, generally speaking, how is it that human understanding of eclipses has changed, and what has really been the thing that has driven a deeper understanding?
So I think the understanding of eclipses is linked to our understanding of the cosmos, right? And we know that, for example, in ancient Greece, there were philosophers at the time that were ensured that the Earth was the center of the universe. So most civilizations, they tended to put the Earth at the center of the universe, and then have the moon rotating around the Earth, the sun moving around the Earth, and the stars moving around. In that kind of primitive way of understanding the cosmos, usually in cultures, it was more linked to the deities that they had mm-hmm. at the time. They would have a deity for the sun, a deity for the moon, and then when, for example, in the Chinese records, we know that they are talking about an eclipse because they say, well, at that time, the sun and the moon, they were no longer, they were no longer living peacefully in the sky, mm-hmm. right? So it's kind of a battle between different deities. But of course, later on, with for instance, Ptolemy, which was an astronomer that made very precise records of the motions of the Earth, the sun, and the moon, and the planets, then it was understood that basically the eclipse is actually the moon blocking the sun. And then, of course, with Copernicus kind of shifting the Earth from the center of the universe and putting the sun at the center, mm-hmm. That also changes a little bit our understanding.
To bring it a little bit closer to our time,
there
was a solar eclipse in 1919, and it is credited with rocketing Albert Einstein to fame. How so, Manel?
So that eclipse in 1919, Arthur Eddington, who was a British astronomer and physicist, he basically wanted to test the theory of general relativity from Einstein, which basically Einstein says that gravity is basically a feature that we see because space-time or space is curved, mm-hmm. right? And then there was this prediction that the sun, because it's a very massive object, it would curve space, and then the light from stars would bend as it was going around the sun. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we cannot observe stars behind the sun because the sun is so bright and the stars are so much dimmer. But then they thought, well, during a solar eclipse, the disk of the sun is blocked, and I will be able to see the stars behind the sun. Mm-hmm. And if the stars have shifted their position a little bit, then I will know that Einstein's right.
Right.
So they did. They mounted a couple of expeditions in different spots to make sure that they would be able to see the total solar eclipse, and they took pictures and they measured the positions of the stars, and they showed that in fact the stars had shifted,
Right.
and that the light was being bent by the mass of the sun, and that Einstein was right, and then the way we understand gravity was basically, or the way gravity works was the way that Einstein was promulgating, which was a bit funny politically because Eddington, being a British astronomer, he was basically proving Einstein right, which was a German physicist, and proving Newton wrong, which was a very famous British physicist. So there was also politics involved in those expeditions.
Now, today, we know so much more about total solar eclipses than we have for most of human history. How is it that eclipses help advance our scientific understanding in the 21st century?
So we know, for example, helium, the element helium, was discovered during a solar eclipse in the 19th century, actually. And also all these historical records of that we have of when and where an eclipse happened, they have helped us, for example, to measure that the Earth is spinning a little bit, so that the Earth is spinning slower and slower, so that basically the days are growing longer and longer as time goes on. We have records that say, well, in this at this day on this particular position there was an eclipse, but then when we did the simulations and we go back, we find that the position is a little bit off, and the reason to explain it is that the Earth spin speed has changed slightly, and the best measurements that we have of that effect are from historical records of eclipses.
That was Washington University physics professor Manel Errando. We spoke with him in February about solar eclipses in history and culture. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about today's total solar eclipse with STLPR staff who are out in the field and, yes, even up in the sky, with all the folks gathering to experience a totality awesome event. St. Louis Public Radio has several reporters in the field covering today's total solar eclipse. One of them is our interim digital editor, Brian Munoz, and he joins us now from Carbondale, Illinois, which is just about a 2-hour drive southeast of St. Louis. Brian, welcome.
Hi, Elaine.
Hey, so Carbondale is where you are, and it holds a special distinction for today's eclipse. What is that?
Yeah, the crossroads of the eclipses from 2017 and 2024 is right here in southern Illinois. So everyone has been super excited to be able to experience this once again.
And you've been in Carbondale now for a couple of days, Brian. How is the community there preparing?
The community has been preparing for this moment, honestly, since 2015. That's when Southern Illinois University began its steering committee to prepare for the 2017 eclipse. And when they found out, hey, this is going to happen again in just a few years, they kept it going. But locally, there's been a bunch of people in and around Carbondale and Southern Illinois at large. So you are starting to see some backups there along some of the smaller roads leading into the city. But officials have worked with state and regional collaborations and other officials and law enforcement and that kind of thing to be able to prepare for this moment. But right now it's smooth sailing, and there's a point where you have your plan and all you can do is execute it, and whatever happens, and that's just about where we are.
Mm-hmm. And there's an event happening at a football stadium, right?
Yeah, so I'm right outside of Saluki Stadium, where approximately 15,000 people are going to be watching this celestial spectacle.
Wow.
And they're going to be shepherded through the process and through the eclipse by some folks from the Adler Planetarium in Chicago and some other researchers. NASA's here, of course, a bunch of media are here. So it's really cool to see all of these folks together and being able to experience the eclipse under one metaphorical roof.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are a journalist yourself, interim digital director, and a photojournalist. Will you be trying to capture the eclipse on your camera? And do you have any tips for others who might be trying to do the same?
Absolutely. I am 100% going to try to capture this on my camera. I was here in Carbondale in 2017 as a student, and we were fighting clouds left and right. So I only got to see a very small part of totality, but right now it's looking like clear skies. So I have my lens filter, ready. And if you're going to be photographing the sun at all, I highly, highly, highly recommend. It is imperative that you have a sun filter to go over it that is approved, for this kind of use. If you have your cell phone, you also can use eclipse glasses or any other kind of filter that you can put over your camera lens to capture those partial moments of totality. But whenever totality hits, remove those filters and make sure that you get it without them, and you should be able to photograph the totality, the beautiful corona around the shadow of the moon, just fine. And of course, you can go to our website at stlpr.org/eclipse, and there you'll find photography guides and all kinds of fun stuff related to this awesome event.
All right. Brian, thanks so much. Brian Munoz is STLPR's interim digital editor. Have a great time out there, Brian.
Thanks, Elaine.
STLPR's environment reporter, Kate Grumke, is also covering today's eclipse. Earlier, producer Alex Hoyer asked Kate what she's up to today.
So today I'm going to be getting on a bus with a bunch of people from Washington University, and we are headed to the Bollinger Mills State Historic Site, which is in southeast Missouri and will be in the path of totality. So the basic idea is the people from WashU are going to be doing science education. So the mill is expecting a pretty big crowd to be there, and they wanted to be able to offer some science education. And I'm really excited because I think I'm going to be able to kind of hear what questions people have, and I'm especially interested in how kids are perceiving the eclipse and what their questions are about our solar system and why this happens.
So science education, are these WashU students who will be studying the eclipse in some way?
So there's students at all levels, and then there's also going to be professors, and they're mostly from the physics department and from the Earth, Environmental, and Planetary Sciences department. And they're actually not going to be doing any original research while they're there. It really is about trying to help people understand, but they're going to have all kinds of interesting equipment, like they are going to have telescopes that are hooked up to computers, ranging all the way to colanders and bed sheets. So it's very technical stuff, and then kind of a way that anyone could look at the eclipse.
On a personal level, what is exciting for you about covering this?
I am really interested to find out how the critters in the park react to the eclipse. So apparently there are spring peepers, which are frogs that make a really nice little chirping noise in the spring, but they do that at night. And so the people I spoke with at the park are really interested to find out, are they going to think it's night? Are they going to start doing their nighttime calls during the eclipse? So that's something I'm really looking forward to finding out.
That's STLPR environment reporter Kate Grumke, who spoke with producer Alex Hoyer. Alex also talked with STLPR's Jeremy Goodwin, who has a weatherproof plan for today's eclipse.
Well, there's been a lot of attention on what the cloud cover is going to be like today. Fortunately, I think, don't have to worry about it. I'm going to be above the clouds. I'm actually going to be on a flight from Lambert to Houston during totality, looking for it myself and also interacting with people who are there basically for a mid-air eclipse party.
And so the flight from St. Louis to Houston, that is in the path of totality. Will the entirety of your flight be in that path of totality?
I believe it's going to be a limited period of time that's close to the beginning of the flight. This was a thing where in 2017, this was a bit of a novel idea. In fact, some people took flights specifically for the eclipse, and it was taken as a funny little story. This year, everyone's in on it, and there's been a lot of attention to identifying which flights are going to travel through the path of totality. And there's actually nationwide contests to get onto some of these flights. There's a lot of demand to do it this time. So it's gone from the thing that eclipse watchers kind of know, a little trick they had, to something that a lot of people are trying to get in on this year.
So you'll be above the clouds, if there are clouds. Hopefully there are no clouds.
Mm-hmm.
how will your view be necessarily different, other than potentially above clouds, than what people might see on the ground?
Honestly, I think the clouds are a big part of it, not having to worry about that. But it's a unique experience, Alex. I don't really know until I'm going to see it. I've seen some photos from 2017 taken from a similar flight, and they're quite stunning. You could see the curvature of the Earth a bit. It almost looks like a photo of outer space. I'm not sure if that's what it's going to be like for us.
It's a fairly rare celestial event to begin with, and so to have the opportunity to view it from a plane seems like a fun and unique opportunity. What are you most looking forward to about it?
Well, one thing about it is I am surrendering any sort of control over where I'm going to be when this happens, right? I think the idea is to give everyone on the plane a chance to see it. In 2017, flights like this actually did 2 passes where they let each side of the plane be facing the eclipse and getting a good look at it. I imagine that in the moment, there's going to be a lot of fussing and fidgeting and just making it work and everyone getting a chance to see through those windows and see what it's like. But I imagine it's a kind of experience you can't necessarily anticipate until you see what it's like.
That's STLPR's Jeremy Goodwin talking with producer Alex Hoyer about covering today's eclipse on a Southwest flight from St. Louis to Houston. Joining us now is St. Louis on the Air producer Maya Norfleet. She's about a 90-minute drive south of St. Louis in St. Genevieve. Maya, hello.
Hello.
So you got there very early.
Oh, yeah.
How soon did you see folks setting up there, and what does it all look like now?
Oh, man. So we got in about 6:30, and we were here before a lot of folks. I would say I saw the first bounce house get inflated maybe around 8 a.m. Right now, I'm right next to the playground area at the St. Genevieve Community Center, and it's full of kids because they extended their spring break for this.
Oh, okay. And you've been there, as I said, for a while, and you've been talking with fellow Eclipse fans for several hours now. Maya, what are they telling you about why they're in St. Genevieve for this eclipse experience?
Yeah, so I've talked to a few people who are from St. Genevieve. I talked to a couple of folks that drove in from California, some folks from Kansas and Denver, and they're all here because either they saw the eclipse for themselves in 2017 and just needed to see it again because they know it won't happen again in their lifetimes in the continental U.S. And then a lot of folks who just heard all about it in 2017 and were convinced, like, I can't miss the next one.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that there are lots of kids, and you said there's at least one bounce house. Are we talking several, or?
There's a bounce house. It's full of children right now. And then, like I said, I'm also next to a really fun playground that has a zip line and slides of all different sizes. I'm near they have a lot of baseball fields here. So there's a lot of people that have claimed their spots out on the fields. And then there's also plenty of people tailgating in the 2 larger parking lots here by the community center.
Oh, okay. So is it really looking like it is a family affair, all generations together?
It's literally like, imagine any type of fair that you would have in your community, but everyone's wearing Eclipse T-shirts and getting, like, looking up, even though the eclipse won't start for another hour, so people are already just taking their glasses out, just being sure, yep, that's the sun. I catch people doing that every now and then.
And are there any clouds there? I mean, what is the weather like right now?
There's some wispy clouds, but nothing that's completely obscuring the sun. I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm not even going to pretend like I know exactly what type of clouds these are, but
Sure.
They're very thin.
Now, historic events like this can evoke a feeling of togetherness that comes out of experiencing something extraordinary together, and we're still anticipating this total eclipse there. But how would you describe the vibe?
Right now, the vibe is pretty chill. Folks are coming in, still getting parked with plenty of different, like, I've been here, like I said, for several hours, and the entire time, more cars keep pulling up, more lawn chairs get put out, and all the kids come straight to this playground to have fun until those shows start. So it's very much, there's burgers being grilled. There's a lot of local vendors selling their goods. And I'm just by the community center. There's a whole nother situation going on downtown.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for talking with us, Maya. Enjoy your time out there.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to have a good time here.
That's St. Louis on the Air producer Maya Norfleet in St. Genevieve, Missouri. She's among a team of STLPR reporters covering today's total solar eclipse from various locations. The eclipse begins in just a bit, and that's a little before 2 p.m. this afternoon. Speaking of which, keep your eyes peeled, safely, of course, and let us know about your 2024 solar eclipse experience. Send us a voice memo or an email note at talk@stlpr.org. We'd love to incorporate it into tomorrow's show.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.